Welcome to one more edition of Move to Amend Reports. I'm Egberto and
I am Laura Bonham in this very, very cold mountain home. My very cold mountain home. That Arctic air hit us yesterday, and it has really dropped in temperature here. And I understand it's not exactly balmy in Texas either, Egberto.
I can't believe it. We are almost tropical throughout the year, and now we're under the weather. We are extremely cold, Laura. What did you guys in Utah do to us in Texas? I mean, we're going to have to do something about this.
Well, anyway, it's really a great pleasure to have with us tonight State Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal, the elected state senator for the St. Louis County District 14 in Missouri. She's a graduate of Georgia State University with a BA dual degree in political science and sociology. She is also a jewelry maker. Maria previously worked for former Lieutenant Governor Joe Maxwell as his communications director and served as Missouri's senior advocate and director of boards and commissions. She is a member of the several organizations, including the Democratic Minority Caucus, the University City School Board, the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women, and the National Hispanic Council of State Legislators. In 2008, she received the Legislator of the Year Award by the Missouri Association for Social Welfare and the Legal and Human Rights of Immigrants and Refugees Award by the Missouri Immigrant and Refugee Advocates. Before serving in the Missouri Senate, Maria Chappelle-Nadal served 3 terms in the Missouri House of Representatives. Welcome to the show, Senator.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Let's just jump right out of the chute and begin with some politics. At Move to Amend, we have little to no faith in Congress taking action to address the problem of corporate constitutional rights and money as protected speech. So we're focusing efforts on state legislatures, which is just one of the many reasons we're so excited to have you with us tonight. So let's just back up a little bit and tell us what drove you to get involved in your state's legislature.
Well, I have to tell you, when I was in college in Georgia, I knew that politics was something that I wanted to get involved in. Here in St. Louis, we didn't have at the time when I was in high school a lot of African-American elected officials. And so what I decided to do is come back home. I knew that the line was much shorter for someone who looked like myself in Missouri rather than in Georgia. So I came home, and I started working for the lieutenant governor after the 2000 elections. And I just wanted to serve the people of the community. I felt as though just because you're a woman, you don't vote for a woman. Just because you're black, you don't vote for someone who's African American. But you really need to know the substance of an individual. And I knew early on that I wanted to educate people on issues, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's great. Thanks. Egberto?
Yes. We at Move to Amend believe that economic inequality, oppression, and systemic racism are closely linked to corporate rule and untilism, which is shifting the wealth of this nation into the pockets of the very, very richest Americans and driving more into poverty. You know that, and you know this quite well where you're at. Communities of color have been particularly hit hard, as we can see from the Katrina recovery, the home mortgage crisis, the private prison complex and the school-to-prison pipeline, emergency manager laws that we've seen in Detroit and other places. The list is quite extensive. It tells the story of systemic racism and oppression that exists in the country today and, prevents us from coming together. As an African-American woman in elected office, you are in a unique position to help undermine the power structure of white supremacy. How do we overcome this system, and what role are you playing in this struggle?
Well, every day I have to tell you I challenged the rank and file in both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And I have to say a lot of it comes from my biracial background, being both African American and Hispanic. And what is just wonderful is that with knowledge and information, you have full control. And that is one of the reasons why I serve in two positions. Not only am I a senator, but I'm a school board member. And I think that education is the foundation of life, period. Without it, you can have people do almost anything to you. And so that's where we start off. And obviously, you know that what I'm dealing with in my community, Ferguson, is there is so much injustice. I mean, our human rights have been taken away. Our First Amendment right has been taken away on several different occasions. And what I learned on the front lines very, very early in this process is that people did not know what their rights were. They did not know what their constitutional rights were. And so since then, I have moved to start teaching classes twice a week on civic engagement, because I want people who are peaceful protesters to know what their rights are. But it's really a community that tries to uplift others who are possibly unaware of what opportunities that they have to them. And what we have learned in the last 97 days is that there has been not only a misrepresentation for people of color in the district, but they also have not gotten the resources that they deserve, and they've also been targeted. So, again, we unfortunately had to have a blow-up, which was the death of Michael Brown, to know just how people are being treated. We didn't know. We knew that African Americans were stopped more and Asian Americans were stopped more when they were driving, but we didn't know that the numbers were at least 3 times that of their white counterparts. And so as long as we're giving the same resources, if not more resources, to communities that have often experienced despair, as long as we do that and do it genuinely and do it often, we could build up a community of people who are not only enlightened, but they're awakened and they want to act. One of the greatest accomplishments is that our community is now active in the whole process of recalling people who have denied them, I guess, representation. And it's beautiful. It's just really amazing to see that change in people's lives, where they came from zero to, you know, having a building donated by the city for a youth program.
You know, I want to expand on that a little bit, because you touched on it a bit when you mentioned that the minorities were being stopped more so than their counterparts. And I wonder if people really understand that as an extractive policy that prevents the community itself, the aggrieved community, from actually growing, let's say, financially. I mean, if you're extracting more out of these guys in fines, and if you're extracting out of these guys in all these, you know, in fines and taxes more so than the other population, and then wonder why that particular population is doing so much worse than the other, is this being presented in a manner that these people understand what's actually occurring, not just from being stopped, but actually what it means financially to the community at large?
Oh, absolutely. When we have been looking at the data of stops, and this is recent information as of the last 2 or 3 weeks, what we have found is that there is a substantial difference between those who have drugs and guns and whether or not they're stopped. And it turns out, this is what's interesting, I represent 41 municipalities, and when we looked at the data, you can have a Caucasian, you can have an African American. The Caucasian, most of the time in this data that we've been reviewing, either has a gun or drugs, but they are not arrested, and the African American is arrested. And what happens when you are arrested is you could possibly lose your job. And sometimes in these stops, what we found is that there was no violation whatsoever. And so then you get an FTA, failure to appear in court, and then you have a warrant out for you, and then you end up just going about your life, and you get stopped again, and then you have more jail time. But these FTAs, the failure to appear, the cost of that could be in the thousands of dollars, because they keep it on record for a matter of years, even decades. And so what we have found as some police officers have been targeting peaceful protesters, is that many of the arrests have been people, when they're trying to get their bail, they've had these FTAs, which were in the thousands of dollars, that they never knew about. And so it does, if you lose your job, you lose your welfare. You lose the ability to just sustain your life and the life of your family. And so by having rules and ordinances that disproportionately impact minority communities, it is effectually going to cause them to have a reduction in not only their finances, but also not have the same access as other people have when it comes to just thriving.
Now, Senator Nadal, what is interesting, and Laura, let me get this one in real quick, and then I release. What is interesting is that our corporate media, in presenting the Ferguson situations, have done so from just a matter of the crime that's going on in the street or the rioting, but they don't cover the most important, the essence of the issue, which is what you've just described here, the essence of what's actually occurring. So, one of the reasons that we have programs like these is that we want to get a little deeper than what would be covered in the corporate media.
Yes, and I can tell you there's several corporations that I have in my district. I have the headquarters for Emerson Electric. I have the headquarters for Express Scripts. I have the headquarters for Centene. I have the headquarters for Build-A-Bear. Very close by, we have the headquarters of Monsanto. Also in my district is the headquarters of Boeing. So I have a lot of big corporations in my district, and what we are doing, my organization, which we call Eyes on Ferguson, at Eyes on Ferguson if you're on Twitter, what we've decided to do is look at what philanthropic programs these corporations have had in the past and compare them to what they're trying to offer people of Ferguson and the greater community right now. What I have learned in many of these discussions and in some of our research is that what is given to the community is the same as what was given in the previous year or the previous 2 years. The exception to the rule would be a corporation like Centene, which does not have a lot of business in the state of Missouri, but has decided to build a new infrastructure in Ferguson where people are suffering and develop 200 new jobs where they don't have to, with education paid for after the first year of service and a very small fraction of the cost for daycare and GED. So that would be a corporation that is actually doing something that's worthwhile for a community that is suffering. But there are other corporations that are basically doing the same things that they did before, and then they get the front line, on the front page.
Right. Exactly.
This is just a quick yes or no question, because I have one more political question before we really move into the meat of Ferguson and the struggle that's happening there and elsewhere, obviously. Are you also gathering data on the lobbying that these corporations do? In other words, how they're spending their money to undermine democracy? Well, they may also be spending money to help specifically your community, but what are they also doing to undermine democracy overall?
Yeah, that's public information. Our Missouri Ethics Commission, any registered lobbyist and see who their principals are or who the principals are of a corporate entity and see how much money is given out to different interests. And a lot of times what I have seen, I do track other things. I have to tell you, when legislation comes before us, I always track the money and try to figure out who is trying to pay for a piece of legislation to move forward, because I think that's undemocratic fundamentally. But what we can do as just citizens or other elected officials or just people who care is look at our Missouri Ethics Commission and see what corporations have given to who. Most of the time they've given to leadership in large amounts. But the interesting thing about the Show Me State is that there are two philosophies, whether we're Democrat or Republican, there are two philosophies that we do care about. One is being practical, and then the other is just truth. And what I have found in the almost 15 years that I've been in the state capitol, either as an elected official or as a staffer, what I have found is that, if we find out that there is an exorbitant amount of money going into a piece of policy, we let everybody know about that. We let everybody know about that. And a case in point, education policy, when I was in the House, there is a billionaire by the name of Rex Dingfield who actually, by the way, created the hedge fund. And he literally makes millions of dollars every single day. He created that hedge fund. So in any case, we tracked, every single dollar that he was spending. And, there's some things that we agree on education policy. When I was in the House, we did not agree on a lot of the philosophies that he was trying to push. He is someone who wants to, in terms of tax policy, become like the state of Kansas. I don't know if you've read in the news as of late, they're experiencing a debt right now. Or budget shortfall. And in our state's constitution, we cannot have a shortfall whatsoever. We have to balance our budget. So even though there are interests that pay a lot of money to get something, we always balance that out with, we try to balance it out with what is good for the people and make sure that there's some things that are in pieces of legislation that are going to help people, or we just kill the bill. And that's what we can do in the Senate. A lot of people talk about the negative impact of a filibuster, but for the state of Missouri, when you only have 9 Democrats out of 34, the filibuster is a wonderful tool.
I'll bet it is. Speaking of a filibuster, let me ask one more question concerning politics, and then we're going to talk about Ferguson. So let's talk electoral politics for a moment, because you just did something that very few politicians do. In fact, I would say it elevated you from pole to stateswoman. As you mentioned, you're a Democrat in a primarily Republican state, but frustrated by the non-leadership of your Democratic Governor Jay Nixon, who endorsed the Republican challenger Rick Stream. We talk about the democracy movement being politically as well as financially independent frequently, and you certainly displayed a streak of independence. So, first of all, who won? And why did you cross party lines to endorse a Republican?
Well, you know what? This is not the first time. It's actually the second time that I've done it. And I was elected to the state Senate the first time, and I was just reelected. So it's nothing new for my constituents. What I care about is service delivery. If you have, well, first of all, let me just say, I've had 4 tornadoes in my district. I've had 2 major floods in my district in which 2 people died and several homes were destroyed. And then I've had where electricity was out for days. In fact, not just days, but for weeks. And so what I care about is service delivery. That's it. If you're in a burning building and you're waiting for a firefighter, you don't ask them if they're black or white, Republican, Democrat. You don't ask them any of that. You want to get out of the burning building, and you want to be saved. And that's what's going on in my district, because I know I am a pro-choice person, and the Republican that I supported is not. I know I'm against the death penalty, and I know the Republican that I supported is for the death penalty. But here's the difference. He was running for county executive, and we don't make decisions on any of the social issues that occur. What is important is that we have service delivery. The county executive is responsible for service delivery. And what I will also tell you is that individual was the chair of the budget committee for years. Every single African American, which there are 3 of us in the state Senate, every time we ask for anything for our minority districts from this person, we always got it. Always. Always. No question, no deal making. When we ask for something for our districts, we got it. That is service delivery. So, Ferguson came along, and my rank and file of my party, with the exception of Claire McCaskill, they are nowhere to be found. Nowhere. In fact, I've had more Republican senators come to my district. In fact, Senator Krause is coming to my district. Senator Dixon has come to my district. Senator Emery has come to my district. Senator Schmidt has come to my district. Senator Lamping has come to my district. They're all white males, and they're all Republicans, and not one other Democrat, with the exception of Senator Jamila Nasheed, has come to my district. That's a pathetic state of your party. And that means that your party needs to wake up to the the most loyal demographic in a party. They have been absolutely silent, completely silent, with the exception of Claire McCaskill. Our governor never even went to ground zero until day 15. Our U.S. congressman has not even come but for twice to ground zero in Ferguson. In fact, the first 6 days of Ferguson after Mike Brown was killed, he was on the eastern shore of Maryland vacationing. Congress was on vacation, and he was on the eastern shore of Maryland. So, yeah, I'm disgusted in my party right now. I'm still a Democrat, and I'm still the most liberal Democrat in the Missouri State Senate, and I love being a Democrat. But I will tell you, when you need to be punished, you need to be punished. And let me tell you what happened last Tuesday, which is absolutely exceptional. The current county executive is a Democrat, and he's African American. The person who ran against him and who won in this general election is a Democrat, a white Democrat, a pro-labor Democrat, and they wanted to get him out. That, if you look at the race between the African American who currently sits in the position of county executive and the person who is the county executive-elect, it was based on racial lines. I will tell you that my colleagues in the House of Representatives and the Missouri House of Representatives have also been completely silent. In fact, here's the question. On Monday, one of my colleagues, who is one of my 10 state representatives that I have in my Senate district, said, you know, 2 different circles came up to me, Maria. They're all Democrats, and they asked me the question, who is it that can influence Maria? So it was interesting that question was asked. Here's what that means. When someone asks who can control Maria, the state senator, that means they want to sweep everything under the rug and they want to go back to status quo. And I am not going to tolerate nor accept the status quo any longer. The people that I represent are hurting, they're in pain. Many of them, including myself, are experiencing PTSD because we were tear gassed. I myself was tear gassed along with my intern for 3 hours on a one-way street. So yes, I'm angry and I'm disgusted, and it's time for the entire world to know exactly what's going down in the state of Missouri.
Well, would you ever consider leaving the Democratic Party? Because
no, I'm a Democrat.
Okay, all right. Go ahead,
I'm
Alberto.
a Democrat.
Yeah,
I'm a Democrat, but you need to when you need to clean house, you need to clean house, and I am not going to be quiet. I'm at my glass ceiling as an elected official, and I'm not going to shut up. I'm not going to shut up. I have 4 more years, and I'm going to say what I have to say. I'm not the person to keep quiet.
Great.
Let
Go
me
ahead,
tell you,
Alberto.
Senator, it is wonderful hearing a politician speak this way. You would not imagine what it does for me. Now, let me tell you, we have a losing the Democratic senator who lost here in Texas to Cornyn. He actually he waited till after the election to really come out and excoriate the Democratic Party here in Texas because they asked him, his name is Alamil, not to run, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing this story up. They asked him not to run, and they asked him to give the party $500,000. And during his run, he got zero support from the party. There's specific reasons here in Texas why that was the case, but it's also a specific reason why the Democratic Party in Texas is so far a failed party and why we had the results that we had. If we had more senators like yourself, more Democrats like yourself going out on a limb to do what is right, the average American citizen would actually see that there is somebody out there fighting for them and not. So first of all, I want to thank you for having that modus operandi, because I tell you, Senator Nadal, or I'm sorry, Chappelle-Nadal, that is what we're looking for. But anyhow, we've been following events in Ferguson since August, but it's very hard to get an objective.
But, before you go on, Egberto, let's remind people you're listening to Move to Amend Reports. We're talking with Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal about the ongoing demonstrations in Ferguson and police brutality against civilians. Go ahead, Egberto.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, for putting that in there for me, Laura. We've been following events in Ferguson since August, but it's very, very hard to get an objective view from our corporate media culture, like we spoke a little bit before, which seems to only highlight the worst and most negative moments while largely ignoring the peaceful nature of these demonstrations. Now, we've seen you a whole lot on TV trying to make that point on several different networks. And while it's not covered as it should. Now, you've spent a great deal of time on the ground in Ferguson, including during the initial crackdown by the police. Please tell us what was your experience on the ground during these protests, and what would you be hoping going forward? Thank you.
Well, it's a long conversation. I got to tell you, I was doing some district work. It was a Saturday. I received a phone call from a very good friend of mine, which you guys probably have heard of him, Antonio French, and he never calls me like 14 or 15 times in one day, and he did. And he was like, Maria, you got to get up here. You got to get up here. So I went up there, and I haven't left since. But I will tell you, the first night, we were treated like we're third-class citizens. I've been to Iraq, and let me tell you, our rank and file decided to have all of this weaponry like we are evil imbeciles. Seriously. And this is a Republican state, but we have a Democratic governor. And then we have a Democratic county executive. We have mostly Democrats for statewide. And they allowed us to be treated as if we were insurgents in Afghanistan. And it was just absolutely ridiculous. And this is what should have happened. If you can only fathom, children and just adults looking at a dead body for 4 hours. How traumatic that would be. If you look at Columbine, if you look at what happened in Washington State a couple of weeks ago, or any other school shooting, immediately you would have had counselors and psychologists who were on the ground to try to relieve the pain and the anger in the hearts of these young people. But that never occurred in Ferguson. In fact, instead of addressing the hurt and the pain and the psychological, emotional needs of my constituents, what they decided to do is bring an excessive enforcement of military equipment in front of people. I mean, I saw guns that are as long as my body, and of course I don't even know the names of them, and tear gas. I mean, my goodness. And so we think that on Sunday that we had people from the outside who came in and did some looting. There's only like 1.5 days of looting, period. On that Monday, we were peacefully demonstrating. In fact, I uploaded on my Twitter account some of the pictures from day 1 and day 2 and day 3. And what people will see is that we were peaceful. We were on the sidewalks. We were just doing our chants. We weren't throwing anything. We weren't doing anything. And we ended up being tear gassed and shot at with rubber and wood bullets for 3 hours long, including the State Highway Patrol, because we have it videotaped, including St. Louis County Police, including the Ferguson Police. And for them to treat a black community the way they did is absurd, it's immoral, and it's against every single inkling in anyone's body for the movement for human rights. They completely disregarded our human rights.
Now, this isn't really anything new, right? I mean, yes, that is true. I follow all of that, but I think this is standard modus operandi. The question is, where do we go from here?
Well, before you say that, I just want to say your description was so apt as you were describing that. I mean, I watched this on TV, but listening to you describe it, the images that really stirred in my mind were those ones from Tiananmen Square. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Egberto.
Yeah, but I mean, let me just... Go ahead, Senator.
Well, your question was, this has been standard operation, and where do we go from here? We're going to have institutional racism. We can't just stop this fight. And everyone has a place here in St. Louis. Either there are folks who want to ignore that there's institutional racism, or there are people who are going to advocate for justice and rank and file of every institution. It doesn't matter if it's a police department or if it's state government, because there is institutional racism in state government right now. There is institutional racism in police departments and in city government and in other organizations. And the people who want to silence us are doing a complete disservice to all of humankind. And I think it's unnecessary. But here's the deal. There are people who are out protesting every day. There are people like myself who are teaching. I started off in the first 2 months protesting, and then I started teaching. And it's been the biggest reward of my life to teach my constituents what their civil rights are, what they should do when they go to a city council meeting. Many of them didn't even know who their council members or the mayor was. They didn't know that information. And so we have gone literally from people not knowing who their elected officials are to having a building donated by the city for a youth program. And that's an amazing thing to get to that point. My mom, who is a retired educator, she's helping write grants for these organizations, people who don't know how to write grants. That's one of the things that she taught alongside of criminology. You know, I mean, how funny is that? My mom taught criminology, and we're dealing with some police, not all police, that are basically taking away our civil rights and our First Amendment rights. And so going into the future, what I see is people becoming more engaged. They're awake. People are totally awake now. They see the injustice. They see the institutional racism that has lasted forever. But here's the disconnect, and here's the problem with the governor's statement yesterday. The governor kept saying, okay, finally we're going to allow you to exhibit your First Amendment rights. You know, this is the first time he really has said that publicly. But here's the deal. He balanced that out with, but if you're violent at all, we're ready for you. Now, but the thing is, the governor can't get it through his thick head, the fact of why people are protesting. You know, it wasn't a jobs issue or a lack of jobs that created Michael Brown's death, that situation. It wasn't a lack of jobs. It is because there has been institutional racism in police departments all over the country, and there are some bad actors. Not every single officer is bad, but there are a few who are bad, who make it bad for every other officer. And let me tell you, I appreciate our officers who follow the law and who are educated. One of the flaws that we had is that police officers weren't educated on how to conduct themselves when there is a protest, and that's why they were so violent. We need to deal with this excessive force, this excessive militarization issue. And let me tell you, my own congressman, he voted against an amendment that would have eliminated excessive force by local police departments. Did that in June of this year, and we're just so hurt by that. My constituents, when they found out that he promoted, you know, excessive abuse and use of this military equipment, they were livid. They were absolutely livid, because what happened to us is inhumane. I mean, literally, I have constituents who were hogtied, and then they were unconscious and then kicked by police officers. We have all of that on video. In fact, we have a YouTube video on police treatment in Ferguson. Anyone can look it up, and you can see how people have been treated and disregarded. And just there's chokeholds. There's a young man who's 18 years old who was choke-held by a police officer several times. He was African American, but you would see another person getting arrested who was Caucasian and treated like as if they were a queen, but they were being arrested. So there is a disconnect, absolutely, in education on both sides. The education of people who have been disregarded, abused, and targeted, and there's a lack of education on the side of police officers. And so now we got to get serious. We have to, moving forward, which is your original question, Alberto, is that we have to look at our statutes. Our statutes are not favorable to someone seeking justice. And, you know, oftentimes I'm very pro-labor, but we cannot allow for an officer to, you know, shoot a person unarmed multiple times and then make a pause in the middle of all of those shots, and then as the person is falling down from the initial shots, shoots the fatal shot through his head as he's down on the ground, falling down to the ground. That's absurd. That is what happened to Michael Brown. A police officer was shooting. He stopped, which shows intent. When you have that pause, the kid was 30 feet away, and he says that he told him to stop. But once you're shot multiple times, is it really possible to stand up as if nothing ever happened? And then he proceeded to shoot as Michael Brown was falling down straight through his skull on the top of his head, which meant that he had no strength at all to stand at all. So that's why we're just really angry and upset. There hasn't been full transparency on the part of law enforcement and the prosecuting attorney's office. In fact, we found out that our prosecuting attorney's office hasn't even communicated with the Michael Brown family. They haven't even communicated with them whatsoever.
That is sad.
Which also shows a disconnect.
Well, it's a lack of humanity with which a group is treated. Lack of humanity. His body's saying in the
he's a Democrat.
Power. Yes, I know.
The prosecuting attorney is a Democrat.
Yes, I know. But it has nothing to do with that. It's a lack of humanity that a certain sect has towards black folks and other minorities. It's sad, but it's a reality that we all should come to grasp.
This is systemic racism, and this is why it hurts everybody and not just the targets of the racism, because we have these problems that are so deep, and they're about how society and culture views the relationships of power and to one another. And so I don't have a lot of sympathy for cops that gun people down like that. There was definitely excessive force. There's been excessive force since the get-go here. But on the other hand, there's a failure in the system here to educate their police officers, particularly white officers who are patrolling in African American communities, about systemic racism and how it works and their role in it, and prepare them so that they take the extra mile. I mean, you really got to go the long mile, because you're dealing, especially with these young black youths who have a culture telling them that you either succeed in pro sports or you're going to end up in jail. And, the anger that just is brewing there for, year after year after year. I mean, you have really got to go the extra mile in order to not, because there's anger there just under the surface. And and to me, it would feel a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. Like, what do I have to lose? I'm going to end up in jail one way or the other. I'm going to end up dead one way or the other.
Yes, and let me tell you, since you brought it up, from day one, people were willing to give up their lives. Let me tell you, gang members have put aside their rivalries for this movement. They put aside their rivalries because they want to do something positive. I mean, you have people who were previously I never thought I would be hanging out with felons, but there are people who have been victims of the system in one way or the other, and they want a change. Last night I talked to a former gang member, and he said he sat down with the Chief Belmer in St. Louis County, and it's a beautiful story, really. And he was just saying, hey, listen, I want to live. I didn't want to live. I did not want to live, and my life didn't mean anything because I knew that I was going to die by the time I was 21 years old, but I do want to live. And so with having that conversation, the chief of police was able to be like, okay, we shouldn't treat him like a gangster. I mean, just because someone has a gold tooth or they have dreadlocks does not mean that they're a thug or they're a gangster. They have hearts too. And so what we need to start practicing more of is compassion and having passion. And that's what has been part of my whole thing from the very beginning. For me, I grew up very religious and kind of, went away when I got older. But for me, it was not a choice of whether or not I was going to be at ground zero or not, because I wanted to do the same thing I thought Jesus would do. And that's the example in the Bible that I have, is that Jesus was with the vulnerable, with the voiceless. And had I not been tear gas for 3 hours, the people who lived on North Winds Estates would have zero credibility right now if I was not among the people. And so I get to be a voice for them. I'm proud of that. Yes, it's absolutely tiring, but this is what God wanted me to do. And I don't have a choice in it. I have to deal with it, and I have to do the best job possible.
So,
well, I mean, go ahead, Laura. I'm sorry.
I was going to say we're really getting close to time, and I want to squeak this question in, so please be as brief as you can, although it will be hard. So a grand jury is meeting right now to consider whether or not to indict the officer responsible for the killing of Michael Brown. And that decision is coming within the next week or two, very soon anyway. Most people on both sides of this issue are expecting Darren Wilson, the officer, to be found not guilty. How do you think the community will respond if Brown's killer is left unindicted, and what is the community doing to prepare itself for the verdict?
There's several things that are happening right now. We don't know what the outcome is going to be. In fact, this is not the final. If there must be 9 people on this grand jury who say, yes, let's move on to a real jury, they do not convict. They only say there's enough evidence to move forward to have a trial. And so if 9 out of the 12 say there's enough information to have a trial, then there's a trial, which means there's an indictment. In the case there are less than 9 that want to do an indictment, then that means businesses are putting up boards on their windows so they're not cracked or anything or broken. People are going to the grocery store, looking after their senior citizens, checking in on other neighbors. And there are people who are trying to, which is what we've been trying to do since day one, is have an agreement on the rules of engagement. Let me tell you the biggest limitation. I know you don't have time. There is a 5-second rule. So the governor said you have a curfew. Then the highway patrol created a 5-second rule. And then they said you have to keep walking in a circle. And then they said you can't do this, you can't do that. Every bit of the way, they were trying to quiet us up. They wanted to shut us up. Can you believe that? Instead of it being 2014, we are stuck in 1920 or 1930 in Missouri. Yeah. We are in 1930, and our own Democratic Party wants to shut us up.
Yeah, that's something to think about, isn't it?
It is. It's a sad day.
That is sad, but I tell you what, it is wonderful seeing someone like you taking the position that you're taking. It is wonderful seeing that you're bucking the status quo, both parties, in fact, Democratic and Republican alike, because that is what it's going to take. And I think Laura should be quite happy with that, Laura.
I am. It's been a breath of fresh air having you on the show, Senator. I only wish we all elected officials, possessed your same principles and demonstrated them.
Well, thank you. I certainly appreciate the opportunity.
It is important, and let me tell you, Senator, we are an avenue outside the media, the mainstream, traditional, corporatist media, to get the information out, because we know that there are some limitations, and there are going to be limitations when this result comes out, because just like they shut down your airspace during the riots, it's likely to occur again. So rest assured that you have other avenues. We hope that you'd keep us in mind, Move to Amend and other organizations that are bucking the system like you are. Laura?
Well, we're almost out of time, so please take this opportunity, Senator, to make any final comment and direct people to any resources, online resources.
Yes, here's what I will tell you. I have an Eyes on Ferguson Facebook page, Eyes on Ferguson Twitter. We have Eyes on Ferguson Instagram, and I do believe we have a Eyes on Ferguson website as well. And as things are going down, this weekend, we're going to be letting people know exactly what's going on, and I just want people to be safe. We have God-given rights when we're born in this country. And I am glad that I am a champion and a fighter for the Constitution. There are parts of it that we question, but the one thing that I believe in is the First Amendment. And any time someone tries to take away your voice, they are in the wrong. And it is a step against democracy overall.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator, it was a pleasure having you on the show. It was a breath of fresh air having you on the show, and I hope to speak to you again shortly. We know that there's a lot to come. So thank you very much for having been on our program, Senator.
Thank you so much.
Move to Amend has wrapped up barnstorming tours in Arizona and Massachusetts this month. Join us in December as national spokesperson David Cobb tours Florida, the last tour of 2014. For dates and locations, or if you wish To bring Move to Amend to your community in 2015, visit movetoamend.org/barnstorming. Help us raise awareness about the movement to amend the Constitution by hosting a house party for democracy. Invite your friends and neighbors for screening of our mini documentary, Legalize Democracy. We will provide you with a film and tips for hosting a successful gathering. Visit movetoamend.org/house parties to get started. You can support Move to Amend reports and other Move to Amend programs by joining our $28 for the 28th Amendment Monthly Sustainer Campaign. Pledge $28 a month and help make the We the People Amendment our 28th Amendment to the Constitution. To learn more about corporate personhood, money as protected political speech, and about these campaigns and other ways to get involved with Move to Amend, visit movetoamend.org. Don't forget to sign the petition at movetoamend.org/petition. Join us next Thursday as we talk with the Executive Director for Community to Community Development, Rosalinda Guillen. I probably just murdered that name, about the struggle against corporate agribusiness controlling our food systems. What do you know how to pronounce Rosalinda's last name?
I think it's Guillen, but we'll talk to her about it.
Which has got to be the worst promo ever. Anyway.
Actually, no, it's a real promo. Actually, it is a real promo. That's the one thing with Move to Amend. We represent real people. We are real people. So, folks, thank you very much for spending the time with us. And you have a wonderful night. Laura, take us home.
Tune in next week for the next edition of Move to Amend Reports. Good night.